Last night we talked about the warning French President Emmanuel Macron gave to Biden at the G7 summit about the two top OPEC oil producers, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, claiming they can't increase oil production any more than they already have. But instead of focusing on the energy crisis, I want to switch gears to yet another crisis tonight, and that's the war in Yemen. Reading from this Financial Times article, quote, when Joe Biden ran for the U.S. presidency, he accused Saudi Arabia of murdering children in Yemen, where its forces led a military intervention against Iranian-backed Houthi fighters. But in a striking about turn just weeks ahead of a trip to the kingdom, Biden praised Riyadh's courageous leadership in the conflict, end quote. There is currently a UN-mediated truce in the conflict, which was renewed for another 2 months at the beginning of June. So is there a chance to end the 7-year-old war, or at least the U.S. involvement in it? Perhaps. Now, I know it might be a bit touchy of a subject for some people, but just know that it's largely the fault of the same old cast of characters like Obama and company. Our first guest tonight might blow your mind on tying all those threads together. Scott Horton is a prolific writer and author, and he's the director of the Libertarian Institute, and he joins us now. Thanks for being here tonight, Scott.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. So I know there's a resolution in the House on U.S. war powers that you want to bring to attention here, but before we do, can you explain for our audience why they should care about this conflict? How did this whole thing start anyway? Why are we carrying water for the Saudis? Why did Obama start paying off Yemeni rulers? There's so many questions here. How did we get to this point?
Well, it's a sordid tale, but it starts, of course, with Barack Obama taking office in 2009. And he ordered, as you'll remember, the CIA to launch massive drone wars in Pakistan and in Yemen targeting al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, these are the guys who had bombed the USS Cole in 2000, helped coordinate the September 11th attack, and tried to blow up a plane over Detroit with the underpants bomb on Christmas Day 2009. And they did the Charlie Hebdo attack and some of the other massacres in France. So these are some, real dangerous al-Qaeda terrorists, not just, so-called al-Qaeda linked, like they like to say about whoever they feel like targeting. These are some pretty dangerous guys. So in order to wage this drone war against them, though, Obama had to bribe the dictator, Abdullah Saleh, with all this money and weapons. And he used all the money and weapons to go and attack his rivals, a group of Shiites in the north of the country called the Houthis. Well, skip a couple of steps here, and the Arab Spring comes, and there are peaceful revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt. So all across the Middle East, people say, wow, you can do that? And they go outside to protest and try to overthrow their governments. And in Yemen, what happened was really all different factions came together. The northern Shiite Houthis, the southern socialists, the Muslim Brotherhood from out in Marib, all agreed they wanted a new constitution, a new way to go forward and overthrow the dictator. But Saleh wouldn't leave until someone tried to kill him. Then while he was in Saudi Arabia convalescing, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton swooped in, and she and the Saudis essentially thwarted the will of the people of Yemen who wanted a new way forward and instead stuck them with the vice president. And I swear this is true. People can look it up in Google Images. They held a one-man election. There's one man, one name, one oval for you to fill in on the ballot for Hadi in 2012. And of course, he won in a landslide. And Hillary Clinton proclaimed that this was the advent of Yemeni democracy, right? When in fact they had thwarted self-rule for the people there. Now, Saleh, the old dictator, he didn't go home and retire to a quiet life of study like Mullah Omar. He went away mad, and he took his army with him, and he went up north, and he joined forces with his old rivals, the Houthis. And because Hadi was doing such a terrible job and trying to persecute the Houthis, they ended up marching down and seizing the capital city at the end of 2014. Now, at this time, it's very important to note that our current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, was then the 4-star general, commander of Central Command. And according to Al Monitor and the Wall Street Journal from January 2015, Lloyd Austin was passing intelligence to the Houthis to use to kill al-Qaeda. Of course, to al-Qaeda, the only good Shiite is a dead Shiite. So Lloyd Austin said, hey, if you guys like killing al-Qaeda guys, we'll help you do it. So I'm not necessarily endorsing this program, but at least they're attacking the enemy. Now, just 2 months later, in March of 2015, Barack Obama switches sides in the war, Kara, and he takes the side of essentially Osama bin Laden and the bin Ladenites of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. and their allies, the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates. Now, as the Obama government explained to the New York Times, they said they knew that the war would be long, bloody, and indecisive. In other words, a lot of people are going to get killed, and they don't even know what victory is supposed to look like. Long, bloody, and indecisive. But they said they had to do it to placate the Saudis over the Iran nuclear deal. Now, if you think about it, say you were in the Saudi military, you might appreciate Obama striking a deal that locks down Iran's civilian nuclear program far more than ever before. They poured concrete into their heavy water reactor, expanded inspections beyond any regime in history. So what's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with that is the Saudis were afraid, quite unnecessarily, I assure you, that Obama wanted to tilt back toward Iran and against Saudi Arabia, and like it was back in the 70s. Well, that was just not on the table at all. Obama was barely able to get the nuclear deal through at all, and all he was really doing was taking the threat of war over their nuclear program off the table. He was not putting a new alliance with Iran on the table. But the Saudis wanted to be assured that their place in America's dominated order in the Middle East was assured. So to placate the Saudis, America had to bend to the will of their client state and help them launch this war. And you won't be surprised to find out the war was called Operation Decisive Storm. And that was 7 years ago. And by the way, the Houthis, when they came in, I'm not saying they're good people. They're not. They're a power faction. But they realized that they couldn't just lord it over the whole country. So when they came into power, they started cutting deals with everybody. And I swear this is true. They literally have proposed a bicameral legislature with an upper house for the men who rule, the leaders of the various tribes, and a lower house for the women and the youth. And they were going to incorporate the Southern Socialists and the Muslim Brotherhood and all the different factions that they could into a new coalition. And then the bombs started falling out of the sky. And also, it's extremely important to note that because of the diffusion of responsibility here, the Americans call it the Saudi-led coalition. But they're flying American planes, dropping American bombs. They have American mercenaries and contractors doing all the care and feeding and maintenance of their planes, doing all the logistics, the air traffic control and everything for the air war. And their intelligence agents help pick the targets, and our Navy helps enforce the blockade. So the whole war is really only possible because of the United States of America. But because they call it the Saudi-led war, and they diffuse responsibility. Remember in Libya, they called it leading from behind. We supply all the bombs, but it's somebody else's fault when people get killed, something like that. Well, in this case, they've been bombing the hospitals, the water, the sewage, the electricity, the garbage, any car dealership or truck, plant or food processing facility. They bomb the farms, Kara, the grain silos, the flocks of sheep in the field, the horses in their stables, all the irrigation ditches. They bomb the fishermen's boats. They're doing, from the very beginning of this war, they've done everything that they can, the Saudis and the UAE, to target the very most basic parts of the civilian infrastructure that provides for life for the civilian population of the country. And this is in Yemen, already the poorest country in the Middle East before the war ever started. And because of previous IMF and World Bank gangsterism, they already were importing something like 80 to 90% of their food when the war began and the blockade began. So there have been literally hundreds of thousands of people starving to death. And of course, that mostly means babies and toddlers and the elderly and people who couldn't possibly have played a role in doing anything. Not that the Houthis ever did anything to us. And one more thing, along with the genocide, this war quite literally is treason. And I mean it when I say Obama switched sides. He went from helping the Houthis target al-Qaeda to essentially flying as al-Qaeda's Air Force for the last 7 years. And those are the words of Michael Horton, no relation to me, a real Yemen expert from the Jamestown Foundation. In March of 2015, from the beginning of this war, the second week of this war, he told the Pentagon reporter Mark Perry, well, now we're flying as al-Qaeda's Air Force in Yemen. And AQAP has benefited. For a time, they ruled 7 towns, 1 major city and 6 other towns. And eventually, because that was so embarrassing, they just got integrated into the UAE's militia on the ground. So America is literally flying as air cover, helping AQAP fight against their enemies, the Houthis, who never did anything to us.
And Sally, as you were talking about, you see all those horrific images online of children with their stomachs distended and they're very scrawny. Their limbs are suffering cholera and all these other horrific diseases that have broken out, of course, in the wake of this war and of all the blockades that are going on. And so I want to ask you, I see you've been bringing a lot of attention to it online on social media, but how can viewers at home who want to stop this, who want to stop this madness, how would you recommend they go about that?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for asking because, this isn't just a complaint. We actually have a real advantage to press right now. And that is because, as you mentioned, we are in now the third month of what started as a 2-month ceasefire. And so, as you said, it's been extended. And the Saudis, importantly, have abandoned their major goal of reinstalling the last dictator, which was never going to happen anyway. And they've proposed a new council, which isn't perfect, but it represents a major climb down on their part. And there's a brand new resolution in the U.S. House of Representatives. It's called HJ 87, and it is the War Powers Resolution of 1973, the one passed over Richard Nixon's veto in 1973. They're invoking the War Powers Resolution, which says that if the president launches any unconstitutional war after 60 days, the Congress can make him stop. Well, that's what's happening here. And so there's a massive effort by a bunch of Yemen peace groups and various peace groups and Yemen activists and the brand new Libertarian Party, which my faction has just taken over, me and my friends. And we are making as big of an effort as we possibly can to turn out tens of thousands of calls, maybe more if we're lucky, to Congress. We want their phones ringing off the hook on support for this War Powers Resolution. Again, it's HJ 87. And here's what you can do. You just call 833-STOP-WAR. And it's really easy. You just type in your zip code and they'll connect you right to your congressman. It's almost flawless. The zip codes in the congressional districts are not perfect, but it's pretty close. You call 833-STOP-WAR and they'll connect you right to your congressman. Call them during business hours. And listen, I can tell you from the Yemen activists I talked to, Kara, the staffers in the congressional offices are begging for more calls. They're saying the calls really do help. They have to make their case to the boss, and they need to be able to say the phone is ringing off the hook. The people really care about this. We have to do this one. And they've already started at 50 or 60 something co-sponsors, and they're already up over 100 co-sponsors, including 11 America First Republicans led by Massey and Gates. And so this is a great opportunity for the America First faction, the post-George W. Bush faction of the American Republican Party and of the American right to pressure their congressman to stop this genocide and this treason in Yemen. Again, it's 833-STOP-WAR. And it's not perfect, but if we can get this passed, and there's a version in the Senate coming soon, if we can get this passed, and especially with huge majorities, it could be the pressure that we need to get Biden to tell the Saudis, all right, let's figure out how to get out of this. As I said, the Saudis are climbing down. The Saudis have had enough because the Houthis have figured out how to strike into Saudi territory and blow up their refineries with drones and rockets and things. And the war has just not worked. So they're looking for a way to climb down. So if people live in a Democratic district, when you call, tell them, support the president by passing this War Powers Resolution. He wants to end this war. And if you live in a Republican district, tell them, Obama started this thing. You don't trust Brandon to finish it right. And America first, Donald Trump said it. America first. America come home from these wars in the Middle East where we do not belong.
Scott, I love it. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and for giving us really that history lesson as well.
Thank you so much for having me.